I will never forget that night. It was the eve of my 61st birthday, and the house was so quiet I could hear the pulsing of my own heart. I fell asleep late, going over memories of other birthdays, the hugs that were gone, the sound of my husband Kofi's voice. He had passed on 5 years before, leaving this world for good. Sometimes I still thought I heard him, especially when the wind hit the windows or the old dining room clock chimed midnight. But that night was not an echo. It was him. I saw him in my dream with a clarity that chilled my soul. He was standing right next to the bed in the same clothes he wore on the day he left us, his faded blue work shirt, sleeves rolled up, and that familiar scent of sweet pipe tobacco that always trailed him. His face was serious, but his eyes looked more mournful than afraid. He spoke to me with a firm voice, not shouting, like a command that allowed no debate. "Abini, you have to get out of the house before the sun comes up." I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. He leaned in close, reaching his hand toward my face. I felt the coldness of his fingers, and a shiver ran right through me. "Listen to me," he insisted. "Before daybreak, you need to go." I woke up with a start. My heart was pounding against my chest. The room was dim. The clock read 3:47 in the morning. The air smelled faintly of natural gas, or maybe I was just imagining it. I sat up in bed and saw something that stopped my breath. A shadow next to the door shaped exactly like a man. I blinked, and it vanished. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming while awake, that the sheer loneliness was playing tricks on me. But then I remembered Kofi's words, "Before the sun comes up." I threw on my robe, grabbed my purse, and left. I didn't turn on any lights. I walked barefoot down the hall with my soul in my throat. When I opened the front door, the pre-dawn wind cut through my skin. The entire neighborhood of Oak Grove was sleeping. The sky was a dark, moonless blanket, and only the distant crow of a rooster broke the silence. I sat on the garden bench, hugging my knees, waiting for the dawn. The cold was seeping into my bones. Several times I wanted to go back inside, but something held me. Not fear, but pure instinct. It was almost 5:30 when the first sliver of light peeked over the rooftops. The dawn painted the sky a faint orange, and just then, a sound shook me to my core, a dry, sharp, tearing explosion. The window panes vibrated. I turned my head and saw my house engulfed in fire. Smoke was billowing from the roof vents, the air filled with the sickening, unbearable smell of gas and burning lumber. I ran, screaming my husband's name, even though I knew he wasn't there. The fire roared, devouring the place that had been my life for 30 years. Neighbors came rushing out, some carrying buckets of water, others calling the fire department. I could only stand paralyzed, watching the flames reflect in my tears. Ms. Etta May, my neighbor, grabbed my shoulders. "Abini, you're alive! Thank God you're alive!" I couldn't answer. My legs were shaking. The fire crackled as if it had a voice, as if it was calling my name again and again. And through the roar of the flames, I thought I heard a phrase, clear, precise, unmistakable. "Told you so, Abini." I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. The voice came from inside the house, from where our bedroom had been. It was Kofi's voice. The firefighters arrived minutes later, but the damage was already done. The walls crumbled. The furniture burned like memories impossible to save. Everything Kofi and I had built was being consumed before my eyes. The heat was so intense, I had to back away. One of the firefighters approached me. "Ma'am, did you live here alone?" I nodded. "You were lucky to get out in time. If you had been inside—" His voice trailed off. He didn't need to finish the sentence. Kofi had saved my life. Again. When the fire was out, the sun was fully risen. The rays illuminated the smoking ruins. For a moment, among the ashes, I thought I saw a silhouette standing motionless, looking toward me. It was him, Kofi, in the same blue shirt, the same sad look. He smiled slightly and vanished into the smoke. I dropped to the ground, trembling. I didn't cry yet. No, I just felt a deep hollowness, as if the last years of my life had been ripped away all at once. And while the firefighters worked, an idea began to grow in my mind. This hadn't been an accident. The fire started in the kitchen, but the gas doesn't just turn on by itself. I had checked everything before going to sleep, and I remembered something else. The afternoon before, my son, Amari, had stopped by the house with his wife, Zola, just to say hello. They had been in the kitchen. Amari said he wanted to fix an oven knob. Zola, meanwhile, kept talking to me with that fake smile that always gave me the chills. The fire hadn't taken my home. It had opened my eyes. That morning, while the neighbors murmured and the firefighters filed their report, I looked at the smoke rising to the sky and whispered, "Thank you, Kofi, for warning me, for not letting me die in the middle of their lies." What I didn't know yet was that the fire hadn't been the end of anything, but the beginning of a much darker truth, a truth that would forever change the way I looked at my own son. The smell of smoke didn't leave my hands for days. I could wash them over and over, but the scent of the disaster lingered, impregnated on my skin, in my memory, in every corner of my mind. I had lost the home where my children grew up, where I slept next to the love of my life, where every wall told a story. But the greatest pain wasn't the material loss, it was the silent certainty that someone had wanted to see me die. That morning, the firefighters allowed me to get close to the wreckage. I wore a scarf covering my mouth to avoid inhaling the dust, and still the air burned in my throat. The team leader, a robust man with a grave voice, explained that the fire had started in the kitchen. "A gas leak, Ms. Abini. The oven valve was probably left open," he said without looking me in the eye. I nodded, though something inside me screamed, "That's impossible!" I was overly meticulous. Ever since Kofi died, I checked the gas 3 times before bed. Sometimes I even took a picture to ease my mind. I had done it that night, too. I remembered perfectly closing the valve, feeling the click under my fingers. Something was very wrong. Among the debris, I recognized the blackened remains of the dining room set. There, among the shadows, a piece of glass shone. It was a picture frame, half melted by the heat. I carefully picked it up. Inside, still visible, was the image. Kofi, our son Amari, and his wife Zola, smiling at a family gathering from 3 years ago. Behind them, on the table, was a white envelope, one I remembered all too well. It was the envelope where Kofi had kept his original will. I stared at that photo for a long time. The fire hadn't consumed it entirely, as if fate had insisted that I find it. In that moment, a thought pierced me like a knife. They knew. Amari had been the last one to mess with the oven. Zola, meanwhile, had been checking my drawers under the guise of helping me clean. The night of the fire, neither of them called to see how I was doing. I had to be the one to contact them the next day. When they finally arrived at the site, they did so with a coldness that chilled my soul. Amari hugged me briefly, without tears, without emotion. Zola, on the other hand, feigned horror with the theatrics of a cheap actress. "Oh, Mama Abini, what a tragedy," she said, holding a hand to her chest. "Thank goodness you got out in time." I just watched her. In her eyes there was no fear, but relief. While we ate lunch at Ms. Etta May's, who had offered me temporary refuge, Amari tried to convince me of something. "Mama, you have to come stay with us." "Can I stay here with you all?" I asked without raising my voice. "Yes, of course. Zola and I will take care of you until everything gets sorted out." Until everything gets sorted out. That phrase made me smile bitterly. I knew perfectly well that what he wanted was to keep me close so he could control what was left. It wasn't the first time he had tried to poke around in my affairs since his father died. Years ago, Kofi had left clear instructions. The house and the property were to remain in my name until the day I passed, at which point they would be divided among the children. But a few months ago, Amari had insisted on helping me with the papers. He said he wanted to make things easier for me, to make sure everything was in order. Now I understood what that meant. I agreed to go with them, though inside I was boiling, not with hatred, but with a dangerous curiosity. I needed to know what else they were hiding. The first day in their house, everything seemed normal, too normal. Zola smiled at every turn, made me coffee, and showed me the guest room. "We made some arrangements, Mama Abini, so you can feel right at home." "Thank you," I replied, suppressing the tremor in my voice. At night, however, something kept me awake. I heard whispers in the hall, footsteps stopping in front of my door. Sometimes I thought I heard the sound of a key turning slowly, as if someone was testing the lock. One morning I opened my eyes and saw a shadow pass under the door. Zola. I recognized her by the perfume. I pretended to sleep. I heard her open my purse and rummage through my things. When she left, I got up slowly. The drawer of my nightstand was slightly ajar. The set of property keys was missing. That morning, while we ate breakfast, I asked Zola, "Have you seen my keys?" "Your keys? No idea." "That's strange. I had them in my purse last night." "Maybe you lost them in the fire, Mama Abini, with all that smoke and confusion?" She smiled. That smile was all the confirmation I needed. I didn't say anything else. I had to move carefully. I knew that if I showed my suspicions too soon, they would isolate me, and this time I wouldn't have Kofi to warn me. That day, while Amari was at work, I decided to check his study. It was a small room full of folders and documents. Among them I found an envelope with the letterhead of the North Star Bank. Inside was a loan agreement in his name, and at the bottom my signature, clearly forged. The loan had been taken out 3 weeks before the fire. The amount was exactly equal to the assessed value of my home, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I felt such dizziness that I had to sit down. My hands trembled. Amari hadn't just tried to rob me. He had already taken out a second mortgage on my house, as if I were already gone. I put the document in my purse. That night, when he returned, I pretended everything was fine. He asked me to tell him again what the fire was like, with a strange insistence. "Are you sure you didn't leave the gas open, Mama?" he asked, looking down. "I'm certain, son. You know I'm careful." "Yes, of course," he muttered. Inside, I was boiling with pain. I couldn't understand when my son had become a stranger. I remembered when, as a boy, he used to bring me flowers from the garden, when he cried if I got sick. Where was that child now? When did I lose him? That night, I prayed for the first time in months. I didn't ask for vengeance. I asked for clarity. And just before falling asleep, I felt it again. The same smell of pipe tobacco, the same low murmur of Kofi next to my ear. "They ain't through with you yet." I woke up sweating, and in that instant, I knew. The fire had been only the first attempt. When I agreed to stay at my son's house, I did it for one reason only. I needed to watch them operate up close. It wasn't love or fear, it was strategy. At this point, the pain had stopped hurting and had turned into pure clarity. A woman who has survived a fire learns to read the embers before they even ignite. Zola seemed delighted to have me there. The first day, she made me breakfast, took me to the pharmacy, and even bought me a new blanket so I would sleep warm. "Mama Abini, you deserve it," she said with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. Her kindness was a perfect mask, and behind it hid something she could no longer disguise: impatience. Amari, on the other hand, avoided staying home much. He greeted me with mechanical affection, like someone fulfilling a duty. Sometimes I saw him leaving before dawn, cell phone in hand, and returning smelling of liquor and someone else's perfume. I pretended to sleep, but my ears, accustomed to long silences, heard everything. One afternoon, while Zola was cooking, the doorbell rang. She dried her hands quickly and peered through the window before opening. "Who is it?" I asked. "Amari's accountant," she answered nervously. "He's just dropping off some work papers." The man entered without looking at me. He carried a leather briefcase and an expression of haste. He left an envelope on the table, exchanged a few words with Zola, and left. But what caught my attention was that she ran to hide the envelope in her purse. That same night, when everyone was asleep, I got up quietly. The purse was on a chair next to the door. I opened it carefully. Inside, besides makeup and keys, I found the accountant's envelope. and within it, a copy of Kofi's falsified will. I couldn't stop my hands from trembling. The document had my name, but the signature wasn't mine. The handwriting was clumsy, unsteady, almost childlike. It claimed that the house and property were to pass directly to Amari upon my accidental or natural death. Accidental. That word was branded on my skin like a burn. I put the envelope back where I found it, and that night I didn't sleep. The next morning, Zola walked into my room without knocking. "Mama Abini, did you sleep well?" she asked in her sickly sweet tone. "Yes, child, like an angel." "Oh, I'm glad, because last night I heard noises in the hallway. I thought you had gotten up." "Must have been the wind," I lied. Her eyes scanned me like a cat observing its prey. "You need to be careful, Mama Abini. A fall at your age could be fatal." She smiled, turning away, and for an instant I swear I saw the shadow of evil in her expression. Amari, meanwhile, seemed increasingly distant. When I tried to talk to him about his father, he changed the subject. When I asked about his job, he answered evasively. One night, returning late, I heard him arguing with Zola in the kitchen. "I told you it wasn't the right time," he muttered. "And when will it be, Amari?" she shot back. "We can't keep waiting." "Keep your voice down, for God's sake. She might hear you." "So what? She can barely climb the stairs. She won't last much longer." My soul shriveled. My own children were planning my end. And yet, instead of fear, I felt a strange calm, the kind only felt by someone who has nothing left to lose. The next day, I faked a faint. I fell in the hallway while Zola was on the phone. Her reaction was instantaneous. She ran toward me, but not to help. "Amari!" she screamed. "Hurry up!" He rushed downstairs. He grabbed my shoulders, pale. "Mama! Mama! Can you hear me?" I opened my eyes slowly. "It was just dizziness, son. Don't worry." The family doctor came to check on me. "Nothing serious," he said. "Stress, probably." But the effect was exactly what I was looking for. Zola and Amari dropped their guard. They started talking less carefully, believing I was weak. And that's how I learned what they were really plotting. One night, I heard the phrase that turned my blood to ice. Zola, whispering low, said, "If we do it with the gas again, nobody will suspect a thing." Amari replied, "No, we can't repeat that. This time, it has to look like a fall." I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. They had tried to kill me once, and they planned to do it again. The next morning, I acted as naturally as always. I smiled, cooked, and even thanked them for taking care of me. Zola hugged me with feigned tenderness. "How lucky we are to have you here, Mama Abini." "Yes," I replied serenely, "and how lucky I am to be alive." She laughed, not understanding. But that very afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Elias Thorne, the attorney who had drafted Kofi's will. "Ms. Abini," he said in a low voice, looking around. "I need to speak with you privately." Zola immediately approached. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Just an old paper matter," I replied. "Don't worry." We went out to the yard. Elias pulled an envelope from his briefcase. "This is your husband's original will." "How did you get it? I thought it was lost in the fire." "I kept it safe at the office. Your son came to me 2 months ago with another document, but I smelled a rat." I looked him in the eyes. "What did that other document say?" "That you had voluntarily signed over all your assets." I had to close my eyes to keep from weeping. Kofi had warned me from the other side, and now I understood why. They didn't just want my money, they wanted to erase my name. That night, I put the original will under my mattress. I slept little, but not out of fear. For the first time in weeks, I slept with a purpose. I knew the battle was just beginning, and this time I wasn't going to run away. Before closing my eyes, I smelled Kofi's pipe tobacco again. "Easy now, Abini," I heard his voice, clear and close. "You ain't alone anymore." I smiled in the darkness, because I knew it was true. The fire that had almost killed me was now burning inside me, and it wouldn't go out until the truth came to light. There is no silence heavier than the silence in a house where everyone is lying. During the day, voices fill the halls, forced laughter rings out, and silverware clinks on the table. But at night, when the lights go out and the air becomes thick, the truth walks barefoot. I no longer slept deeply. My body rested, but my ears stayed alert. I could distinguish every noise: the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of the curtains, the hum of the refrigerator. And among all those sounds, one began to repeat itself every morning. The sound of footsteps by my door. They were slow, careful, as if someone was trying to avoid making noise. Sometimes they stopped in front of my room for minutes, and I could hear the visitors' held breath. I knew who it was. Zola. I didn't confront her. On the contrary, every night I pretended to sleep, leaving my purse within reach of her curiosity. I knew she couldn't resist the temptation to check my things. A guilty mind always needs to check if it has left any loose ends. At breakfast, her performance was impeccable. "Mama Abini, I made you oatmeal with cinnamon just the way you like it." "Thank you, child," I replied in a gentle voice while I watched her move. Every gesture was an act. Sometimes I wondered if even her affection for Amari was part of the script. Amari, for his part, was increasingly absent. He slept poorly, drank more, and argued with Zola in private. When he tried to speak to me, his voice cracked mid-sentence, as if a part of him still felt shame. One evening, while we were having dinner, Zola mentioned something that made me look down to hide the tremor in my hands. "Amari, sweetheart, did you talk to the insurance lawyer yet?" she said, pouring him wine. "Not now, Zola," he replied, irritated. "Sure, because that money can't wait." She shot him a glare, making it clear I wasn't supposed to hear that. I spent the days in silence, observing every word, every gesture, every lie. Until one afternoon, while they were out running errands, I went into their bedroom. The door was ajar. On the dresser was a framed picture of our family: Kofi, Amari, my youngest daughter Niala, and me, smiling. But behind the frame, carefully hidden, was a blue folder. I opened it. Inside were copies of notarized documents, payment receipts, and among them, a falsified medical report. Abini Navarro. Advanced heart failure. The date was recent. My name, my age, my address. But I had never had that exam. I froze. This was part of the plan. To make everyone believe my death would be natural, I kept the document, closed the folder, and put it back in its place. I couldn't act yet. I still needed more proof and more strength. That night, as I turned off the lamp, I smelled a familiar scent: pipe tobacco, the same aroma Kofi always left when he sat beside me on sleepless nights. "Don't cry, Abini," his voice whispered, so real it raised the hair on my arms. "Fear no longer belongs to you." I closed my eyes, letting the tears fall silently. I knew that somehow he was still watching over me. The next morning, I decided to go for a walk. I hadn't had fresh air in weeks. As I walked through the neighborhood park, I ran into Ms. Etta May. When she saw me, she hugged me tightly. "Abini, you don't know how I prayed for you. That fire was the devil's work." "Yes," I replied, looking at the ground, "the devil with a last name." She looked at me in surprise. I asked her not to ask any questions, but just to help me with something. I handed her the envelope with the original will and asked her to keep it at her house without telling anyone. "Please, Etta May," I pleaded. "If anything happens to me, take it directly to the attorney, Elias Thorne." Her eyes welled up. "Are they threatening you?" "Not yet," I said, "but they will." When I returned home, Zola was waiting for me in the living room. "Where were you, Mama Abini?" "Just walking a bit. I needed air." "You should have let us know. We were worried." "Were you really?" I asked, smiling. "I didn't think anyone here worried about me." Her smile vanished. In her eyes, I saw a flicker of irritation. Just a second, but enough to confirm she knew something was changing. That night, I pretended to have chest pain. I groaned just enough to wake Amari. "Mama, what's wrong?" he asked, alarmed. "Nothing, son, just a little pressure." Zola ran to get a glass of water while I watched her face. There was no fear in her, only contained anxiety. "We should take her to the hospital," Amari said. "No need," I replied calmly. "I'm fine." And then, seeing them argue, I understood that their alliance was starting to break. The weight of guilt was separating them, and I was going to use it. The next day I showed up at Elias Thorne's office without warning. I brought the falsified document I had found. When he compared it with the original, he shook his head. "This is a serious felony, Abini. Do you want to proceed legally?" "Not yet," I replied. "Not yet." "Why wait?" "Because I want to see how far they're willing to go." Elias looked at me with respect and perhaps a little fear. He knew that behind my quiet voice, something bigger was brewing. That night, Zola was near my door again, but this time, when she turned the knob, I was already awake. I waited for her to enter. She walked toward my purse and clumsily opened it. Then I turned on the lamp. "Looking for something, Zola?" Her face went pale as she jumped. "Oh, Mama Abini, you scared me. I just came to see if you needed anything." "At 2 a.m? How thoughtful." We looked at each other in silence. The air was thick, almost unbreathable. I didn't blink. She didn't either. During that eternal minute, she understood that I knew everything. "You should get some sleep, Zola," I finally said, my voice low. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." "Why do you say that?" "I just have a feeling." She turned and left without another word. I locked the door, leaned my back against it, and took a deep breath. The fear was gone. In its place, a strange calm had been born, the kind of calm that only precedes the storm. And as the dawn painted the sky gray, I promised myself that everything would soon be over. I would no longer be the woman who ran from the fire. I would be the one who started it. They say silence is the language of the wise. I learned it's also the weapon of the survivor. After so much time living surrounded by lies, I understood that sometimes the best way to attack is to pretend you're already defeated. I began my performance one ordinary morning. During breakfast, I let my coffee cup drop. The hot liquid burned my hand, but I showed no sign of pain. Zola ran toward me, feigning concern. "Mama Abini, what's wrong?" "I don't know, child. Lately, everything just slips out of my hands." Amari looked at me, frowning, worried, but not so much for my health as for the possibility of his plan getting complicated. I lowered my head, took a deep breath, and coughed dramatically. It was the start of my little theater. Over the next few days, I began to fake symptoms: dizziness, weakness, lack of appetite. Zola shadowed me every step, smiling, helpful, and increasingly confident. She gave me my medication, little white pills that I held under my tongue and then flushed down the toilet. I didn't know what they were, but I didn't need to check to understand they weren't vitamins. Amari began to be absent more frequently. He said he had work, but I saw him arrive before dawn with a tense face. Guilt was eating him alive, and all I had to do was wait. That waiting was my best ally. While they thought my mind was fading, I was gathering evidence. I recorded their conversations with a tiny device hidden in my robe. I saved copies of the forged documents, and when I had everything, I wrote a letter in my own handwriting addressed to attorney Elias Thorne. If anything happened to me, he would know exactly what to do. One afternoon, while Zola was talking on her cell phone in the backyard, I heard her from the window. "Yeah, everything's going fine. She won't last long. The doctor says her heart is weak," she hissed. "No, she doesn't suspect a thing. Trust me, when they least expect it, we'll be free." Free. That word churned my soul. Free from whom? From me. From the woman who gave them shelter, food, love, and their father's legacy. I couldn't comprehend when love had turned into greed. That night, I decided the time had come. I prepared the house carefully. On the dining table, I placed Kofi's portrait with a single candle lit in front of it. I played soft music, the same song we listened to on our anniversaries. Zola looked confused. "What's going on, Mama Abini? A celebration?" "A family dinner," I replied calmly. "It's been a while since the three of us ate together." "What a nice thought," she said, though her eyes flashed with suspicion. Amari arrived minutes later, thinner, his face tired. He gave me a weak hug. "Mama, I don't know if this is a good idea." "Yes, it is," I assured him. "Tonight, we all need to talk." As I served the food, I felt a peace that was strange to me. It was the kind of serenity that only comes when one is no longer afraid. Kofi had taught me that. Dignity is non-negotiable, not even with your own children. "Looks like an anniversary dinner," Zola said, laughing mockingly. "In a way it is," I replied. "Today marks 1 year since Kofi passed." Silence fell over the table like a stone. Amari put down his silverware. "Mama, I didn't know." "Of course not," I said. "You never remember the important dates." We ate in silence for a few minutes. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Zola played with her wine glass. Amari watched her restlessly, not knowing what to expect. Then I spoke. "I've thought a lot about the fire." Both of them tensed up. "It was an accident, Mama," Amari said quickly. "Yes, that's what everyone said, but there's something that doesn't add up," I continued. "I checked the gas that night. I closed it with my own hands." Zola laughed nervously. "And what are you suggesting, Mama Abini? That someone tried to kill you?" I looked her in the eyes. "I'm not suggesting it, Zola. I know it." The silence that followed was endless. Amari watched me with a distorted face. Zola tried to hide it, but her eyes betrayed her. "You have no proof," she said, clenching her teeth. "On the contrary," I replied, "I have all of it." I pulled a folder from my pocket. Inside were the recordings, the copies of the forged loan, the photos, and Kofi's original will. Amari went white. Zola stood motionless, her wine glass halfway to her mouth. "It can't be," he whispered. "It is. And everything is in the hands of the attorney and the police," I said calmly. "But I didn't call them to seek revenge." "Then why?" Amari asked, desperate. "Because I want you to look me in the eyes while I tell you what you did." I got up slowly and picked up Kofi's portrait. "Do you remember this man?" I asked. "The one who gave you everything?" Amari lowered his head. Zola remained silent, her hands shaking. "He trusted you," I continued, "and you, instead of honoring his memory, tried to destroy the little I had left." Amari burst into tears. Zola tried to stand up, but her legs were trembling. "I don't understand," she murmured. "How did you find out?" "He told me," I replied. Both of them looked at me, confused. "Who?" Amari asked. "Kofi? Dad is dead!" Zola yelled, losing control. "Oh, yes? Then explain how I knew to run out of the house that night." The wind blew hard, and one of the candles went out. The air turned icy cold. Zola hugged herself. Amari looked around, frightened. "Mama, what are you doing?" "Nothing, son. Just closing a chapter." In that moment, the dining room door opened by itself. A cold blast of air swept through the room, making the flames of the candles flicker wildly. No one spoke. Zola put a hand to her chest. Amari stood up. "It must be the draft," he stammered. I smiled. "Yes, the draft. Or Kofi." I looked at the portrait, and for a second, I swear I saw his smile move, barely perceptible. The shadow of his silhouette seemed to reflect on the wall. "Dad," Amari whispered, his voice broken. "Yes, son," I said. "Listen closely." Because the wind, that wind that seemed to roar from the past, brought a sound that was not a simple draft. It was a sigh, a name. Amari. Zola burst into tears. Amari fell to his knees. I remained standing, firm, serene. "I don't want to see you in prison," I said. "But I do want you to live knowing what you did." Amari looked up, tearful. "Mama, I didn't—" "Don't speak. There are no words that can clean away an intention." The clock struck 9. I put out the candles one by one. "This dinner is over." "And what are you going to do now?" Zola asked, trembling. "Nothing. The rest will take care of itself." The next day, the police came for them, not because I called, but because Elias Thorne had already turned over everything. My task was done. That night, I sat alone in the dining room. The wind still entered through the cracks. The scent of pipe tobacco lingered in the air, and suddenly I felt it again, that warm presence behind me. "Thank you, Kofi," I whispered, "for warning me and for coming back." The portrait frame fell to the floor without anyone touching it, but the glass didn't break. I picked it up and saw that Kofi's smile seemed clearer than ever. I closed my eyes and felt a gentle breeze caress my face. And then I knew I wasn't alone. I never was. Silence has a sound all its own. I hadn't noticed it until then. It's a slow echo that seeps through empty spaces, a murmur that caresses what is no longer there. After everything that had happened, the truth, the tears, the screams, and the court proceedings, only that remained. Silence. A different silence. Without fear, without lies. A clean silence. The house where I now lived was small, with light-colored walls and windows overlooking the yard. Sometimes it was difficult to get used to so much free space, to not hear furtive steps or voices whispering behind my back. But little by little, I began to love that calm. Every sunrise was a promise. I could breathe without feeling like someone was waiting for my last gasp. He was greeting me in his own way. Still, there was something pending, an inner voice asking me to close the circle, not with words, but with a gesture. So, one morning, after much thought, I decided to return to the place where everything had begun, my old house, or rather, its ruins. When I arrived, the air smelled of old smoke and wet earth. The rain of the last few days had washed away some of the soot, but the black marks of the fire were still visible on the collapsed walls. The gate was rusted. When I pushed it, it groaned with a long lament, as if the house itself recognized my presence. I took a few slow steps, looking around. The garden that was once full of roses was now a rough patch covered in weeds. The windows were gone. The blackened floor was covered with fragments of glass, broken ceramic, and pieces of my life. Every little piece told a story. I stopped in front of where the kitchen used to be. I remembered Kofi sitting at the table reading the newspaper while I made coffee. "Abini, you know what I like most about coffee?" he used to say. "What?" I'd reply. "That it smells like home." I smiled, though tears burned in my eyes. There was no coffee this time, just the sour smell of the past. I walked toward the hallway. The walls, or what was left of them, were covered in ash. The frame of a door still stood, like a lonely arch, resisting oblivion. The wind blew softly, lifting the dust in small swirls, and that's when something caught my eye, a flash among the debris. I crouched down with effort. My body ached, but my soul urged me on. I pushed aside the pieces of wood one by one until my fingers touched something cold and metallic. It was a ring. My heart stopped for an instant. I lifted it carefully, and when I saw it, a sob escaped me uncontrollably. It was Kofi's wedding band, the same one he wore the day we got married, with the tiny inscription inside, a K. It had survived the fire, the time, the forgetfulness. It was as if Kofi were telling me that despite everything, love can also withstand the flames. As I held it between my fingers, I remembered the day he first put it on me. It was a warm December afternoon. We were young, naive, happy. Kofi was shaking more than I was. "I don't know if I deserve this much," he told me, "but I promise to learn how." I laughed and answered, "Love isn't deserved, Kofi. It's cared for." Years later, through everything we went through, that phrase came back to me again and again. And now, standing among the ruins, I understood that we had kept our promise. We had cared for each other, even after death. I continued walking among the remains, searching without knowing exactly what. Something inside me told me that there was still one hidden truth, and I found it. Under a fallen beam, almost buried, was a small metal box. I pulled it out with trembling hands. It was blackened, dented, but closed. I opened it. Inside were several envelopes and a letter. The top envelope had my name on it, Abeni. I immediately recognized the handwriting, Kofi's, the same hand that had filled so many small notes stuck to the mirror, the same hand that wrote to me when we argued, "I'm waiting for you on the porch. I won't sleep without your forgiveness." The paper was yellowed, but the words were still there, intact. Abeni, if you're reading this, it's because life took you further than we imagined. Don't be afraid. Fear does not belong to you. Courage does. If the fire ever touches your life, remember that fire purifies, it does not destroy. Don't let anyone steal your faith, not even the ones you love, because true love doesn't hurt. It teaches. I will be with you where the wind stops and silence embraces you. Your strength will be my peace. My tears fell onto the page, blurring the words but honest. I spoke to him in a low voice, my soul open. "Oh, Kofi, even in your death, you continue to guide me." Under that letter was a smaller one, wrapped with a red ribbon. Inside, an old key and a short note, almost a written whisper. "For when everything ends, you deserve to start over." I didn't understand. I put it in my coat pocket along with the ring. I knew that at some point I would discover its purpose. That afternoon, attorney Elias Thorne called me. His voice sounded different, as if he too held a secret. "Abeni, there's something I didn't tell you before." "What is it?" "Kofi left an account in your name." "An account?" "Yes. It holds funds and documents that he asked me to safeguard. He said I should only give them to you if you made it alive to this point." "And how did he know that?" "I don't know, Ms. Abeni, but he asked me to tell you one exact phrase. Tell her the fire wasn't an end, it was a beginning." I felt my heart constrict. The key. That key was for this box. Kofi had planned everything, not as an escape, but as a second chance. That night, I returned to the ruins for the last time. I brought the ring, the key, and the letters with me. The sky was clear, and the moon illuminated the lot like a silver lamp. I sat on the fallen wall of what was once our bedroom. The air was cold, but it didn't hurt. It smelled of earth, ash, and pipe tobacco, that unmistakable aroma. "Is that you, Kofi?" I whispered. There was no answer, but the wind suddenly stirred, soft and enveloping, like a caress on my hair. I closed my eyes and felt him so close that my soul trembled. "You are free now, Abeni." The voice didn't sound outside, it sounded within, inside my chest, inside my memory, inside everything I once was. I opened my eyes. The sky was dawning. The horizon was burning with pink tones, and for an instant, the fire of the past turned into pure light. Then I understood. Kofi never asked me to run from the fire. He asked me to seek the sunrise. I stayed there until the sun was high. Every ray was a blessing, a new breath for the soul. When I finally stood up, I looked back one last time. The ruins no longer seemed like a tomb to me. They were a testament. What burns doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it is reborn different. I walked back slowly along the dirt path. The birds were singing, and the air smelled of promise. In my pocket, the key seemed to vibrate as if it had its own pulse. I knew I still had one step to take, opening that new door. That afternoon, I went to the bank, handed over the key and the number Elias had given me, and waited. The manager returned with a small safe deposit box. Inside was a folder, a deed, and a final note. Abini, this oceanfront land belongs to you. It is our refuge. Go there when the noise of life wears you out. Your freedom begins there. I couldn't stop the tears. Kofi had planned everything, not as an escape, but as a second opportunity. That night, back home, I lit a candle next to Kofi's portrait. The fire danced, reflecting his smile in the glass. I spoke to him softly. Thank you for not letting me die, for teaching me that even fire can have a soul. I blew out the candle with a sigh. The darkness no longer scared me because the light was still on inside me. And as the wind came through the window, carrying the scent of tobacco and sea salt, I felt Kofi walking beside me, silent and satisfied. The fire separated us, my love, but the truth brought us back together. Sometimes life takes everything away from you so you can learn to look at what's essential. I understood that when I stood before the ocean, with empty hands and my soul finally at peace. Months passed since the night the truth came to light. Months in which I learned to breathe without fear, to sleep without locking the doors, to speak without trembling. I lived in the small house Kofi had left for me on that oceanfront land I never knew existed. A simple white cottage with big windows and the smell of new wood. From my room, I could hear the waves breaking against the rocks and the cry of the seagulls at dawn. The sea became my companion, and the wind, the messenger of everything that isn't said but felt. Every day began the same way. I woke up early, lit a candle in front of Kofi's portrait, and opened the windows to let the breeze in. I was no longer afraid of the smell of smoke or the sound of doors moving with the air. Now I knew they weren't signs of death, but reminders of life. It was him saying hello in his own way. At first, the solitude hurt. I was used to serving, caring for, and living for others, and suddenly, I had to learn to live for myself. It was hard to accept that my house was empty, that there were no foreign footsteps or voices feigning affection. But with time, I understood that silence wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. I started writing in a new notebook with blue covers, not to remember the past, but to be grateful. I jotted down small things, the smell of warm cornbread, the sound of the ocean at dawn, the calmness of not having to lie, and a phrase I repeated every morning. I survived the fire, and I learned to love the embers. One day, while I was watering the flowers, a young man from the town approached me. It was Elijah, the son of a fisherman who lived nearby. "Are you Ms. Abini?" he asked shyly. "Yes," I replied. "My daddy told me about your story. He said you overcame the fire." I smiled. "I didn't overcome it, Elijah. I just learned not to fear it." Since then, the young man began to visit often. He helped me with groceries, fixed things around the house, and stayed to chat in the afternoons. He was noble, curious, and full of life. Sometimes he reminded me of Amari when he was little, before greed stole his innocence. One afternoon, I told him part of my story, not all of it, because some wounds shouldn't be opened twice. He listened in silence, and in the end, he said something that struck me. My daddy always says that people who survive a fire don't ever burn again. They just shine different. I looked him in the eyes and knew he was right. Little by little, I began to redecorate my new life. I hung curtains I had saved from the fire. I restored an old chair I found at the market and planted white roses in the garden. I called them the Daughters of the Fire. Every time they bloomed, the air filled with perfume, as if life wanted to remind me that beauty can also be born from ash. I started receiving visits from women in the town, many of them widows or elders like me. They came for tea, to chat, to laugh. At first, they called me the Lady of the Fire. With time, they just called me Sister Abini, and without intending to, I became a refuge for those who, like me, had lost something, but still had the will to live. One December night, right on the eve of my birthday, I sat facing the sea. It was the same date Kofi had appeared to me in my dreams that fateful year. The sky was clear, and the stars seemed closer than ever. I lit a candle next to me and closed my eyes. "Thank you, my love," I whispered, "for not letting me fall, for continuing to guide me." The wind blew softly, and the candle flame tilted without going out. The scent of pipe tobacco appeared sharp and enveloping, like a familiar caress. I smiled. I didn't need to see him to know he was there. "I promise I will keep living, Kofi," I said, looking up at the sky. Not out of obligation, but out of love. At dawn, the sea was calm. The sun emerged from the horizon with a golden glow that seemed to set the water on fire without burning it. I stayed watching that image, realizing that this was the true fire Kofi told me about, the one that doesn't destroy, but transforms, the one that purifies the soul. I stood up, took a deep breath, and felt a lightness I hadn't felt in years. It was as if life was finally giving me back what fear had taken away. I went back to the house, and as I passed the mirror, I noticed something that surprised me. My reflection was no longer that of a broken woman. It was that of someone who had survived, learned, and forgiven. And in my eyes, I saw him, Kofi, smiling from somewhere on the other side of time. That afternoon, I wrote the last page of my blue notebook. I didn't want it to be a sad ending, but a luminous goodbye. I wrote, "The fire wanted to destroy me, but it didn't know I was fire too. Kofi saved me once, but after that, I had to save myself. And now, when the sun rises and the sea shines, I know we are still walking together, him in the heavens and me on the earth." I closed the notebook, put out the candle, and sat by the window. The wind brought the aroma of roses, and for an instant, I thought I heard a voice, distant, serene, warm. "Told you so, Abini. The dawn always comes after the fire." Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.